Thank you. That's a big step for an 80-year-old. And if you want me to do a Joe Biden imitation, I'll be happy to. No. First of all, congratulations to this organization, all women. I mean, I talked to a number of them coming in, and someday women are going to control the world. They already do, but most of the men don't know it. And when women do that, we're going to be so much better off. I truly think we won't have some of the conflicts, and we may not actually have war. And Katharine Graham, who was the publisher of the Washington Post during Watergate, the owner, some of you may have read her autobiography, which the only publisher who ever won a Pulitzer Prize, and she did. And she was the supporting voice and spine of what the coverage we were able to do. And after Nixon resigned, she wrote Carl Bernstein and myself a letter. And it was, Katharine had more stationery than any 500 people in Washington. But this letter was written on a yellow legal pad. Dear Carl and Bob, now Nixon's resigned and you did some of the stories. Quote, now don't start thinking too highly of yourself. And let me give you some advice. And she said, my advice is beware the demon pomposity. Beware the demon pomposity. Such wisdom, such great advice in my business. There's really pomposity stalks the halls too often. There is a smugness and self-satisfaction, and it doesn't work. People don't like pomposity, and we need to find some way to still be aggressive, probing, but not be self-satisfied, not get into that poison of smugness. And it's a big challenge, and something we in the news business need to walk the road of self-examination. I think we need to do that in our political parties, both parties. And I'm not gonna talk too long, but there are two events going back 50 years that I remember very well that kind of provide some deep reflection about the moment we're in politically right now. And this goes back to literally August 7th, 1974. Nixon was in trouble. Tapes were coming out. He knew he was going to be impeached. And he called the Senate leader, Hugh Scott, and the Republican leader in the House, John Rhodes, to the White House with Barry Goldwater, who was in many ways, the conscience of the Republican Party. It's one of the most amazing meetings in American presidential history, I think, because Nixon is there alone, no aide, no lawyer, Hugh Scott, Rhodes, Goldwater, and he knows he's going to be impeached, indicted, charged by the House because tapes were coming out, but he wants to get a sense of what's going on with the Senate. So he asks, and Hugh Scott, Senator Scott, and John Rhodes say, we've asked Barry to be our spokesman. And so Goldwater said, Mr. President, and they're throwing around numbers about the number of votes Nixon would need in the Senate to actually stay in office. And 2/3, if you recall your Constitution, will remove a president. But so to stay in office, he would need 34 votes. And so they're talking numbers, how many, Barry, how many do you think I have? And then Goldwater kind of clears his throat and says, Mr. President, I've counted. And you have 5 votes. And one of them is not mine. The next night, Nixon went on television, as some of you may recall, and announced he was resigning. Now, the next day, when he actually resigned, which was August 9th, he gave a farewell speech at the White House in the East Room, and it was televised. And Nixon had his wife and 2 daughters and son-in-laws standing there. And he had lots of grievances about the way his family had been treated and how he really, he was angry. And here he has to give up the office he'd fought all of his life for. And there is a moment in it, again, another extraordinary moment in presidential history. Nixon kind of turns to the camera and says the following, quote, always there will be people who hate you. Always remember that. There will be people who hate you. But only if you hate them, then you destroy yourself. And think of the wisdom in that the hating destroys rather than creates. You don't win when you hate. It is the poison. I believe it's the poison that destroyed his presidency. We have political hate in our country now. It is at a level that I never thought was possible. And I want to recall this, which just shook me. Advance almost 50 years. I'm doing my interviews with Donald Trump. He's the president. And I'm down at Mar-a-Lago. And I think it was December 30th, 2019, the last year of his presidency. He'd been impeached, and we're interviewing about that. And then at the end, Trump says, I want you to see something. And Dan Scavino, who was Trump's social media person, came in with his laptop and opened the laptop. And Trump said, look at this. And Trump stood right behind me watching this. Scavino it was a film of Trump's State of the Union address, but there was no audio. It was just a bunch of elevator music in the background. And it panned to members of Congress, particularly Democrats, who were listening to Trump. And so the camera comes to Senator Bernie Sanders, leading progressive. Trump's right back here. And we watch this, and Trump says, hate. See the hate. He hates. Then it goes to Senator Elizabeth Warren. And Trump, I thought he was going to bite me. He's on fire, and he says, hate, hate. Then Kamala Harris comes on, and she was a senator at the time before she was vice president. And Trump says, hate, hate. As perplexed as I've been in my life, and he was right, some of these people do hate him, but the passion and the intensity which he expressed his belief that he was hated. And so the hate that Nixon talked about, that destroyed, is still with us, both parties. And we better be deeply concerned about that, because political hate leads to, sorry to go so long here, leads to war. And the war we have in Ukraine going on right now is a version of political hate. Vladimir Putin hates Ukraine, hates that Ukraine was independent, hates that the Soviet Union collapsed and launched this war. Just look at what happened today in Lviv, Lviv, a Ukrainian city on the western part of Ukraine, hundreds of miles from the front, was attacked by 30 Russian drones and a ballistic missile. A ballistic missile. Lviv, 43 miles from the Polish border, is attacked this way, and most of the drones were shot down by the Ukrainians, but a number of them got through. And the big attack where someone was killed and there was massive destruction was a Catholic charity in Lviv. And the warehouse caught fire because of the attack, and 300 tons of humanitarian aid and food was burnt and destroyed. Where the hell are we? Thank you.